All right, well, let's go ahead and get started again. So the next division that we're going to run through is the Environmental Services Division within the Department of Infrastructure. The division, excuse me? Oh, I'm Adam Boatright. I am the county engineer, and then also the Development Services Director, which that will be the next box that fills in on our magical slide here in a few minutes. I'm going to run through the Environmental Services Division. That division is headed up by a gentleman named Roger Hickman. And here are some of their duties. One of the high volume main duties is the on-site sewage facility regulation in that program. If any of y'all in this room have a property that have a septic system, you may have worked with our office on permitting or maintenance or revising your system or anything like that. That we call it OSSF, but the kind of the common term that most people recognize it is septic systems. So all over the county, we permit, review, inspect construction, address violations, those kinds of things. And then stormwater management. So we have some obligations through some state permits related to stormwater that we have to do inspections and keep up with our stormwater management plan throughout the county. It's a pretty small area. It doesn't go inside cities. It's areas of the county that are generally near population centers, which are cities or maybe MUDs. And so that area is pretty small, but we do have some stormwater management plan requirements. And then coordination with other agencies and departments. You could have this box on basically all of the slides that we have, because if it's a road project, if it's an environmental issue, if it's a development issue, I mean, we're always next to a city, next to the state of Texas with TxDOT or some other entity or other county departments. So that's kind of an ongoing thing. And then public communication with our stormwater management plan. We communicate that to public and provide that plan to the public and talk to the public about those things. A couple of slides here. This is some septic tank installation. You can see on the top, you don't have a picture that I have on my screen. Let's see, oh, there it is, okay. On this one you can see kind of a septic bed. So, you wash your hands in the sink or from the dishwasher, runs to the septic system and runs to these leaching chambers on that individual's property. So we permit and review, permit, inspect the construction of these things. And, the county doesn't have to be in the on-site sewage facilities business. If we didn't do it, then it would just default to the state of Texas. But the Commissioner's Court recognizes the importance of public health and safety, and so has chosen to adopt some more stringent requirements related to septic systems. And that's all in the name of protecting public health and minimizing issues of groundwater contamination, raw sewage on the ground, a bunch of undesirable things that our citizens and the county does not want to see. We do unfortunately have to do some enforcement. You can see here someone had a septic system and they're adding a garage apartment or an additional structure, and you can see kind of the way they've plumbed it in. Obviously this does not really meet standards, and so the original system was designed for maybe a 2 or 3 bedroom house. Well, now you have this garage apartment. It's not compliant, and in the name of public health, we have to step in and unfortunately do some enforcement cases. Here's another picture showing some of those enforcement. You see a law enforcement officer there and the one on the right. You see the failing system there on the left, and so and that's the gentleman in the picture on the right is one of our OSSF employees. I just want to point out in this picture, we talked about a lot of wonderful things, but it's really all about the people. So you see one of our employees here. You saw the guy in the parts department earlier holding the nuts and bolts. None of this stuff happens without the dedicated employees that we have, that have the heart of a public servant and come in to serve you all every day. That's a really important piece of all this stuff that's going on here. Okay, before I move on from environmental services, got a lot of more material. Anybody got any questions on that? Septic systems? Anything? Go ahead.
How does the OSSF know to investigate? Is it like people call in and they say like something's going on with my neighbors?
It is generally driven by a complaint. A lot of times these things are, I mean, sometimes it's just so obvious we see it from the road. A lot of times it's neighbor complaints. Sometimes it's, we're looking at, I'm sure y'all all use Google Maps and other things that have aerial photos. So sometimes maybe we're looking at another project. Somebody has come into our office and they're working with us on following all the rules. And we're looking at that property and we go, whoa, we didn't know next door that now they have 3 garage apartments added to that facility. So there's a variety of ways, but I would say the most common is the neighbor that calls in, either because there's a undesirable issue going on or an odor, sewage. I mean, some of these things can be pretty egregious. Sewage, raw sewage on the ground, a variety of things. Anybody else on it?
We have, there's a property down the road from where we live, and what the guy did was he decided that he was going to start parking a bunch of RVs.
Okay.
Start by parking gravel trucks, right?
Okay.
And then from there, he moved into a few RVs, and now it's, I don't know, maybe 20, 25 RVs kind of stuffed in the back. And originally, I think he had told the neighbors nobody's going to be living in those, right?
Just storage or something?
I don't know how he's handling all these RVs.
It's a good.
It's really creepy. I think somebody needs to take a look at it.
I would agree with you. So, and it may be one we're aware of.
Can I call your office?
Yes, you can stay after and talk to me, or you can grab one of my business cards and let me know.
That same number that I gave you will also get to the regardless.
Yes, ma'am.
Just wondering if you use drones to investigate or examine different places?
We do not currently use drones to investigate. You know, the county owns some drones for some purposes, but our department does not currently own drones. It's something being talked about. I'm not aware that we've put that in place, but you know, it is, I mean, it's a thing, right, in society nowadays, but not something for this particular purpose that is, you know, has any widespread use yet. Don't know if that changes in the future, just kind of a topic of conversation. Hey, one important thing I left off on the environmental services. So the county owns a landfill that's on the east side of the county. There's an operator of that landfill, which is Waste Management, but the Environmental Services Division does manage the landfill for the county. Okay, I'm going to move into my favorite box on the screen, the Development Services and Drainage Division. That's the area that I oversee. Here are some of the functions. The first box right there, the development review, would be about 4 full-time jobs at the moment alone, but also have traffic engineering, and I'll get into in a second. I'll talk about some of those duties. Floodplain management. David Zwernemann is our floodplain manager and leads that area, and he's got a presentation he's going to give if I don't use up too much time. Right-of-way regulation. So people want to use our right-of-way for all kinds of things all the time. Maybe they're parking, I think somebody mentioned parking a trailer and the axles came off or something. So we're managing our right-of-way. That particular issue, sometimes we hand off to law enforcement, but there's all kinds of things going on in our right-of-way, and it's a county, you know, property asset that we have to manage. Utility permitting, so there are quite a bit of utilities that locate within the county's right-of-way, and so they have a right to do so. If they're a public utility, we get to dictate where and how deep and some of the terms, but they do have a right to the right-of-way if they're a public utility. We do some permitting of those functions. The coordination with other agencies, which I've already discovered, and then public communication. Things like this, talking to industry groups, talking to, you know, which can be engineering, real estate, construction, banking, all kinds of things. We're constantly trying to get the message out there of what we do and what rules apply. Somehow we still have a lot of folks that, you know, come to us and say, well, I was told I was out in the county and there were no rules. Well, we're trying to get the message out there that, you know, while we can't regulate everything, there are specific things that we regulate, and you need to come see us for permits or various items. Okay, first, the development review. Okay, Has anybody felt any development pressure in Williamson County? I mean, anybody driven around and like noticed anything? I actually have a hard time like driving around on the weekends because like I drive by and I just go, oh my gosh, there's so much going on. And it's a lot to manage, but the county has chosen to, adopt. Well, let me back up and say an interesting thing about a county is different from a city. Counties are only allowed to do the things that the state specifically says that we have the power to do. Where on the reverse, or somewhat the reverse, cities can adopt all kinds of rules as long as the state hasn't specifically said you can't adopt that kind of rule. And so, we have quite a bit of urbanization with our development. It's not all rural country. I mean, we certainly have some of that, but we have quite a bit of urbanization. But we are limited in the tools available based on what the state has allowed us to do. Now, the Commissioner's Court has chosen to, in most cases, adopt and use that authority to a reasonable extent. And again, just kind of to repeat, to promote public health and safety and welfare and protect all of us as taxpayers' pocketbooks. They have chosen to put things in place to address development. I get a lot of calls and say, hey, I don't like this project, why don't you just stop it? Or, I think every commissioner, the judge probably gets that on a daily or weekly basis. We do not have the ability, if it meets our rules, to just say no. I have no power at all. All I do is review it on behalf of the Commissioner's Court and send it to the Commissioner's Court. But generally, there is not an ability to say no. There is an ability to adopt regulations that apply so that it protects public health, safety, and welfare, doesn't overly burden the taxpayers, and those kinds of things. But the development is coming here and is going to happen whether we like it or not. And so our task is to have reasonable rules and protect public health and safety. Okay, maybe y'all have seen this on some other presentations that y'all have been to, but just to kind of reiterate, I think we all know that Williamson County is booming. Current population, this says 2024, 713. The current, Connie, unless you have other information, my understanding the estimate's about 750. And you can see that that's not expected to slow down. So we are a growing area. We're going to continue to grow, and we're booming. And a lot of the stuff that you see here in the slides that I'm going to go through and David are going to go through are based on trying to address that growth in a reasonable, responsible way. Quick update. So to the county subdivision regulations. So our main tool to regulate development are through subdivision regulations. And which cities have lots of other tools, but for us, when people are taking what was a 100-acre cornfield and they're splitting it up, and some are houses and maybe parts an HEB or a variety of things, then that is the time where we get to look at it and look at the planning for roadways, look at the planning for drainage and floodplain, access to existing roadways, impacts that it's going to have on traffic, all those variety of things. And earlier this year, the court, continuing to feel the development pressure that we all are, asked me to, well, actually back in 2024, asked me to start looking at some amendments to our subdivision regulations. And so March of this year, we put forth some amendments to the Commissioner's Court, which they chose to adopt. And these are some of the highlights. So traffic impact analysis. So the theme there is when a developer comes in, that if they're going to have an impact on the existing roadway system, that they need to mitigate the impacts of that. Oftentimes meaning they would pay for those impacts. They would pay for traffic signals. They would design and construct traffic signals, widen roadways, build turn lanes, those types of things. The next one is very similar, related, turn lanes. So I'll give you an example. The picture there on the top right, that is an HEB that is being constructed in the county. It is not going to be in a city. So we're not just rural country. Like we have HEBs and we have other, things that you would normally see in a city. Well, when that HEB was being planned and developed, it's right at Ronald Reagan and Williams Drive, if anybody's familiar with that area. I think there's some folks out in that area that are super excited to have a new HEB. But we were working with them and said, hey, you have got to put in turn lanes. You're gonna generate a tremendous amount of traffic coming to this HEB and shopping center. You need to put in turn lanes on Ronald Reagan so that people who are slowing down to turn into this development, they don't get rear-ended by other traffic. And so now in our subdivision regulations, that's a requirement that all developments, if they're really tiny, if one of y'all have 10 acres and you were cutting off 1 acre to sell for somebody to build a house, most likely wouldn't require its own turn lane. But if it's a big housing development, an HEB or something of significance, then turn lanes are required. Water and wastewater infrastructure requirements. So the court, with the development pressure, recognizing the strains on water infrastructure and some of the challenges and impacts of wastewater, wanted to take advantage of some opportunity to be more stringent in our subdivision regulations on what was required of a developer to submit and prove up that they actually had the water capacity that would be needed to serve the number of lots they're planning to develop, and that they had adequate provision for wastewater, whether that's connecting to, and really goes for both water and wastewater, but if they're connecting to a city, like the city of Georgetown has a water system, prove it to us that water is going to be available when those people live there, and that water hasn't been spoken for by 10 other developers, and same thing on the wastewater. And so the requirements are now much, much more stringent for someone to prove up that they actually have what they say they have. And that sounds like I think we'd all agree, that sounds like a reasonable, responsible thing. But among other things, I have a slide here that's going to kind of show all the land that's being tied up by development. But there was some land that was being what's called entitled by development, which basically means they bring us a plan and that kind of sets in stone the rules that apply for that development. Well, that's a big deal for a developer. There was some concern that land was being tied up that didn't quite have too early in the process and didn't quite have all the other ducks in a row when it came to water and wastewater, and that not being a good thing, that really the water and wastewater information needs to be proved up to a greater extent than it was being. Okay, and then the 2 bullets there on the bottom right, Atlas 14 floodplain study. David is going to run through that here shortly, but that's a countywide study, and through the development process, allowing some provisions for some requirements and provisions for that information to be used through the development process. And then lastly, legislative changes. Every 2 years, y'all are most likely aware, the legislature meets down in Austin. They continue to kind of change the ground rules on cities and counties related to development. So about every 2 years, when the things come out of the new laws come out of the legislature and take effect, we have to react accordingly and update our subdivision regulations so that we're compliant with the law. Okay, I think we could spend all 2 hours talking about development. And I'm going to maybe talk a little bit more about it, but that's really kind of it. So again, after we're done here, I'll be around if anybody has any questions. But moving on to some of our other functions, so traffic engineering. So think of now, the development's occurred, it's an existing subdivision, it's full of residents, all the houses are built. Well, now you have, a variety of traffic issues. Maybe a new roadway has opened up connecting the neighborhood to, I don't know, a major roadway like Ronald Reagan or something, and traffic patterns are changed. Or there's a school that's been built and come in, and that's changed the patterns where pedestrians might walk to and from, homes and the school. Well, that's kind of a constantly evolving thing, and the county has oversight over stop signs, crosswalks, school zones, speed limits, traffic signals, all of those things. There are some real specific requirements that by law that we're required to follow. There's a national manual for traffic signs and stop signs and traffic signals and things. And we don't have the ability, because I get a lot of calls that say, there's too much speeding in front of my house. if you would just put a stop sign right in front of my house, that would correct all the problems. And, you know, I get the unfortunate pleasure of often telling people, I'm sorry, maybe we will look at some other ways to address your issue, but we're not able to put a stop sign there because it does not meet the requirements for a stop sign based on national standards that we're required to follow. And in those standards, like one of the first tenets, as you're reading this section, says that stop signs shall not be used for speed control. So that is probably a daily, or if not daily, a couple times a week occurrence that people want more stop signs to. And look, we're all feeling the impacts of additional traffic. Okay, that's a real thing. But and we do everything that we can within the tools that we have to make sure that the roadways are safe and that people are able to move efficiently. But the message I'm trying to relay is just that we don't have the ability to just go do whatever we want. We have to follow rules and laws that are in place. Here's a picture of a crosswalk. That's it's kind of same thing, in line with what I just mentioned. But, you know, all over the county, as traffic grows, we're looking at, you know, all kinds of traffic items. So an interesting one, does anybody know what the speed limit is on a rural county road if there's no speed limit sign?
30?
I don't know, 60?
It's Texas, isn't it 80?
Oh, I'm gonna let the sheriff know about that one. Okay, so by law, well, on all roadways, whether there's a posted speed limit sign or not, you're required to go a safe and prudent speed, right? If the speed limit on the roadway in front of our office is 45 miles an hour and there's ice on the road, it's probably not a safe and prudent speed. If it's a beautiful day, you know, I might find that it's safe and prudent to maybe go a little, you know, 46 miles an hour or something. But on an unsigned county road, the de facto speed limit is 60 miles per hour. Well, and as y'all can understand, when on some of the roads that Matt showed that were, you know, 18 feet wide and two cars can't pass each other, when it's all ranches and farms and the traffic volumes are really low and two trucks meet on that county road, they pull to the side and they probably stop and chit chat and, you know, talk about their cattle or their crops or various things, and, you know, generally works okay. Well, if those ranches and farms weren't being bought by developers, that would probably continue to work. But the reality is that those things are being bought by developers, and they're being developed, and now we have, you know, hundreds of homes, or traffic patterns have significantly changed. Well, one of the things that we're doing, in addition to Matt's trying to widen the roads according to his plan, is we're having to go look at a lot of those roads and say, okay, now that the traffic patterns and volumes have changed, unsigned 60 miles per hour, you know, may not be appropriate anymore. And so we go out and we collect data and we do what's called a speed study, which goes back to, we have to follow a manual and laws on exactly how that process works. We can't just eyeball it and say, well, that looks like it should be, you know, 45 miles an hour or something. That's not permitted by law. And so we go out and do a speed study. Well, here's a very interesting thing. And think about, you know, we have smaller local roads inside subdivisions where people may bike, walk their dogs, those kinds of things. And then we have the rural county road that's 60 miles per hour. Well, the rules that apply for that speed study is we go out and collect data, and we see, and there's a few other criteria, like we look to see if there's preventable accidents or some other things. But in general, we look at what 85% of the vehicles, the speed that they're driving at or under, and that is and we have some wiggle room, 5 miles per hour of that, but that is generally where you set the speed limit. So if you live in a neighborhood and the speed is 30 miles an hour, and you call my office and you say, hey, everyone on this road is speeding, I want you to come out here and do a speed study to lower the speed limit. Well, if everyone is speeding, that means the road is allowing for, now of course there's always bad drivers, right? And that's why it's 85%. We throw out the top, you know, the 15%. If everyone is driving faster than the speed limit, then that's indicating that the road allows for folks to drive faster than what's posted. And so we never in a neighborhood want to raise the speed limit. That's not it's not seen as something that we're interested in doing. We have to do what's appropriate and safe. But if we go out there and study it and the speed limit's 30, and it's 85% is driving at or under 40, well, guess what? We're kind of boxed in on maybe potentially raising the speed limit. Now, on the rural county, so that's an issue we have to deal with. On the rural county roads where it's unposted, 60 miles per hour, narrow width, it's really, we go out there and collect the data, say the 85th percentile is 45 miles per hour. Well, that's a case where we go, okay, it's time that we post a 45 mile per hour speed sign because that is what the road allows and what is safe. All right, moving on. I'm fixing to turn this over to David, but I'm going to come back. So I think if y'all have questions for me, I'll save those for the end. But okay, moving on to, these are some pictures of some just major flooding events that have happened around the county over the last few years. And the following slide is going to get into David's Atlas 14 floodplain presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to David, and then I'm going to come back and, as time allows, work quickly and try to wrap us up.
Yes, and so I'm going to talk to you about my favorite project that I've been working on for a few years, this Atlas 14 floodplain study. This is one component of what me and my team do for the county. Real quick, who has heard of this study? Okay, a few people. Well, that's good. Well, I'm going to breeze through this as quickly as I can. This is easily a 30, 40-minute study that I'm going to try to get down in 5 or 10 minutes, so we'll see. I'm not a fast talker, but I'll do my best. So again, what is this study? Well, this is really a study to re-study all of the floodplains throughout the county, including the cities. Why are we doing it? So residents can have a better understanding of where flooding risk is in the county, and also to help guide new construction and development or things you may want to do on your property, and to make sure people are aware that this little dry swale that you see out there, since it hadn't rained heavily in quite a few years, could potentially flood someday. Again, why is it called Atlas 14? Well, Atlas 14 is really just the latest statistical analysis we have of rainfall data. So Atlas 14 is just rainfall data. And this was put together by the National Weather Service, NOAA, back in 2018. It was released. And so that was released in 2018. In 2019, the state legislature was charged the Texas Water Development Board with ensuring that all communities throughout the state had floodplain information, because there are quite a few counties, particularly in West Texas, that have no floodplain data whatsoever. And so the awareness is to get out there and do more flood studies. So that was the state charged with that in 2019. And this came together, and the state was able to offer some grants. So we did get a grant from the Texas Water Development Board Flood Infrastructure Fund to conduct this study, and we thought it was a great opportunity to do that. Why is it needed? Well, we have a lot of old floodplain information. We have many FEMA floodplains that have never had a detailed study ever. They had some basic information, put it together, said this is where we think the floodplain is. It's approximate. We don't have any flood elevations to go with it. We do the best we can. So it's somewhat of a burden for landowners as well as us to manage that. We have many streams that have never had a flood study, and those can be pretty extensive from what we have right now. Again, a lot of our studies are over 30 years old, including the major San Gabriel rivers and the Berry Creek in the county. Those are old flood studies. We are a very fast-growing county, a lot of development pressures, and our emergency management team also needs to have the latest updates on where, when does this road flood, and how are we going to get through it. So a lot of different reasons we wanted to do this study. Again, the Atlas 14 came out in 2018. This is a compilation of historical storms that have occurred previous to that time, up until 2017. So they included some of the larger storms we've had in more recent years in the county, the 2007 flood, Tropical Storm Hermine in 2010, the 2013 floods and 2015 floods, mostly in the Brushy Creek watershed, 2016 floods, and the last really big one was 2018 on the South Fork of the San Gabriel, and that was a really big one. But so a lot of those floods got factored into these analyses. Before that, our latest rainfall data was compiled up to 1994, released in 1998, and so we had an additional 25 years of data for the Weather Service to analyze this and produce these results just for Texas. So great new data that we could use. Again, we also had new topography that came out in 2017. So all these things came together, said this is a great opportunity to do this study. So we undertook it. It's been a multi-year effort. We've hired some consultants that are experienced in hydrologic and hydraulic engineering to help us with this study. And we finally got models produced. And we did want to make sure this data is as accurate as possible, so we did quite a bit of validation to confirm that what the models are telling us is accurate. We have conducted 3 different sets of public meetings throughout. Initially when we kicked off the study, last year when we first provided the draft floodplains, we had about 9 public meetings across the county to share this information. And we just had one last month as well to let folks know we're wrapping up the study. But we did validate with all of the information we had from historical storm high water marks, other localized studies that cities may have had, and the gauging data that we had, and knowing that part of our county is in the adverse aquifer recharge zone, and some of that runoff may go directly into the aquifer instead of running off. All that was factored in. We want accurate results. We're not looking for conservative or overblown results, but as best we can based on the latest scientific data. So basically this is kind of what we have produced, and it's kind of hard to see. If you can make out the blue, those are existing FEMA floodplains that we have in the county. Up to this point, it's about 1,500 linear miles of floodplain throughout the county, including the cities. And the green, if you can make that out, it's mainly extensions. We carried this study up further in the watershed. Basically, if there's a watershed that drains 64 acres, from that point downstream, we are producing a floodplain. And that is consistent with our subdivision regulations. When a big neighborhood comes in and they've got a creek that maybe didn't have a flood study, or maybe it was an old outdated study and it had more than 64 acres draining to it, we made them do a flood study. So we've been getting a lot of piecemeal studies, but we wanted to have a consistent methodology, ensure that all the knobs and the modeling was all done consistently across the county, so people couldn't say, well, you did it this way here, you did it this way here. No, it's all consistent modeling. Variables go into the modeling and parameters, and we are adding about 1,300 linear miles of floodplain with these new extensions up the tributaries and other creeks that were never studied. So nearly doubling the stream miles of floodplain that we are producing now. And part of this was actually to also identify, okay, who might be in the floodplain, who's not. So this was a simplified analysis where we intersected the building footprints that we got from our appraisal district of all the buildings across the county. If they touched one of these floodplains, then we identified it with a dot on the map. And we said, you know, this is a flood exposure. Now, it doesn't necessarily say the risk. It's not looking at the elevation of that home that could be 2 or 3 feet above ground. Just saying if that foundation touches one of these floodplains, it produces a dot on the map. And putting some numbers to that, we had about 5,300 touching FEMA floodplains. We're nearly doubling that with all the additional floodplains that we have produced. Some of these floodplains have gotten wider because the rainfall has gotten heavier. I didn't mention the Atlas 14 rainfall is about 1 to 2 inches more for a 100-year, 24-hour storm that we had before. So more rainfall obviously should produce more runoff and more wider floodplains, but also some of the floodplains got more narrow because back in the day when they were done, we didn't have the detailed topography that we do now. And so we had 10-foot USGS differences in topography. Now we're down to 1 foot differences. So we can really finely tune the floodplains based on the ground surface, and some of the floodplains did get smaller. They didn't all get wider. But as this chart shows, 35% of these buildings that are new touching floodplains are from these extensions of the floodplains that we have identified. With those identified, building footprints touching the floodplain, we're kind of focused on, okay, what are the most concentrated areas that, clusters of homes or businesses that could be touching the floodplain. And again, these buildings I didn't mention because I'm going so fast, but these aren't all homes or businesses. Some of them are sheds or barns or that type of thing. So we were just identifying the structures to begin with. But we produced this heat map that kind of shows clustering of floodplains that were could be impacted by floodplains. And part of the reason for doing this is because one of the requirements for the grant that we received from the state is to identify at least 6 sites across the county that could benefit from some kind of mitigation. And so we looked at where the concentration of these buildings at risk, and is there something we could do in these areas to maybe help alleviate existing flooding conditions. This was not looking at future conditions and what new development may be coming, but who is getting flooded at the current time, and is there anything we could do to help alleviate that. So we were charged with coming up with 6 sites across the county, and these were the ones that rose to the highest priority. And so that was part of the study. And the ways we could potentially mitigate those 6 sites would be channel enhancements, maybe doing some clearing, maybe some benching or some reshaping of the creek or the floodplain. Maybe some crossings need to be improved. Maybe we have a small bridge out there that's just not able to pass this water appropriately. So maybe we need to put in a larger bridge, more culverts under the road to help let that water pass through. Maybe we need to hold some of the water back with detention. Maybe there's just too much water coming to this point. So can we hold it back with some kind of detention that holds it temporarily for 24 hours and slowly releases it? And if none of that works, can we buy up some of these properties that flood repetitively? So those are things that potential concepts. Again, at this point, it was just a conceptual analysis, high level, to identify the 6 sites. There is currently no funding set aside to actually go into design or construction for these. That would come at a later time. But this was a great start to at least identify areas that are maybe most in need, and then have the opportunity for these 6 sites to also go into the statewide flood plan, which would enable future grant opportunities or something like that, where we could partner with and maybe further implement some of these mitigation sites that we've identified at this time. And then, so how can you access some of this information? Well, I'm going not too bad. Adam may say he needs more time, but we have a lot of this information on our website. The quickest way to find it, if you go to our home page and just type Atlas 14 in the search bar, it is typically the first return that will come back. Or you can also find the Atlas 14 page under our Development and Drainage Services Department. There's a link to it under there, but we've put together this interactive map that really has a lot of information on it. It's got the existing FEMA floodplains as we have them today, which are still the effective floodplains, and these are shown in the tan color on the left side here. All the new floodplains that we have developed with this study, the Atlas 14 floodplains, are shown in blue, and that vertical bar in the middle can slide back and forth, so you can kind of overlay the FEMA on the new floodplains and back and forth, so you can see how it changed. And we've got information about we actually have 4 sets of floodplains on this that I'm talking about here in just a second, but this home panel talks about the different studies, and then we have a layers button that you can zoom in and toggle more things on and off. This is just a zoomed in visual of it. Again, FEMA floodplains in tan, Atlas 14 floodplains in blue. The slider bars moved over to the right, so you're seeing more FEMA floodplains overlaid on the Atlas 14 ones. We also have some state studies as well that were that the state has conducted, again, since the legislature charged them with making sure that all the communities across the state had some kind of floodplain information. And we have integrated those studies into this map as well. So you can see basically 4 sets of floodplains on this map. The first statewide study they did was called Fathom. They hired a contractor to just look at this whole state at a high level, drop rainfall on the state, or on the ground, and see where where it runs off. So the one on the left here is the Fathom study, really high level. They didn't incorporate any roads or dams or bridges or culverts in the study, but really high level. Does give a pretty good sense of what's going on, but it also shows where water collects in depressions before it actually gets to the creek. The next level is base level engineering in the middle, has a little bit more refinement to it, includes some of the more significant roadways and more significant bridges. Again, done at a really high level, same concept, raining down on the ground, where does the water run off? So it does show areas in depressions as well as they're migrating to the creek. And then the highest accuracy is our Atlas 14 study, where we really zoomed in close to ground level. We went out and surveyed a bunch of structures, creeks, and bridges and culverts and that type of thing, got detailed topography. And so we think it's a much higher accuracy, but it was a traditional floodplain study where we're just analyzing the creeks themselves, not actually where water is sitting off in depressions outside of the creeks. But all of these studies are integrated into this viewer. So if you're interested, take your time to explore it, and you can get quite a good information on it. Where are we at in the process? Again, it's a multi-year study. We really got kicked off in 2021. We just turned in the final draft report to the state at the end of last month. So they have about 2 months to review it, get us back comments, and then we'll finalize this phase of the study. And that will be a great accomplishment that we can use, for many, many purposes, like some of I described. Where are we going next? Well, we are actually going to do a phase 2 on our own outside of the state grant, because as we started this study we had 2017 topography, now we have 2024 topography. And there's been obviously a lot of growth in the county since we started the study. It's always going to be kind of a snapshot in time, identifying floodplains and how they're affected by runoff. But we've identified certain areas that have significantly changed since we started the study, and we weren't able to pick up all the grading plans and engineering plans to incorporate. We're going to go back in selected areas that we've identified that significantly change and just do some updates in those areas, make sure we got the latest and greatest information before we send the study off to FEMA. We would like to send it to FEMA for them to adopt it and eventually replace the old FEMA floodplains with these. Right now, we don't have the funding identified for that either. So that would come next year at the earliest, assuming we can get the funding together or get some grant money to help us out with that. That would be the next step. So it is a process, but that is what we're planning to do. So again, this is the last slide, just to summarize. These are the goals and objectives, trying to update old, outdated information, use the best available engineering and science to produce accurate results so we can inform certainly all the new people that are moving to the county, but everybody else that, hey, this is a hazard. Please be aware. If people are encroaching into a floodplain, and they're outside of city limits, then it is part of my team to manage that and get permits for that and making sure people are doing things right and not impacting their neighbors. But having this as a baseline is taking us light years ahead from where we were. This floodplain information is good for all of our roadway crossings that we have. We don't have to go back and restudy those areas. We've got brand new detailed engineering models for designing the size of the culverts and the bridges that go on our transportation network. have the updated information for our emergency management side of the house. And again, just the awareness for people to, if they want to develop on their property or that type of thing, we've got information that we can use as a baseline and go from there. So again, that really wraps up my portion of the study. I've blown through it. We're up against the clock, so
You want to, well, you want to ask questions?
I can. It's up to you. Yeah. Go ahead.
It's a quick question.
Sure.
So floodplain and flood zone are not the same thing.
They're used interchangeably, yes. Mhm.
So it sounds like you said the floodplain information eventually being turned over to FEMA,
Yes.
and then FEMA is the one,
They would officially review it and adopt it as effective, floodplains in their national flood hazard, layer that they use. We are likely going to adopt these Atlas 14 floodplains probably sometime later this year after the state reviews it, gives us the thumbs up on it. We think this is the best available information. FEMA encourages that. They say, always use the best available information. We can't discard, though, the FEMA floodplains, that those are still effective regulatory floodplains. So in the interim time, before FEMA would ever adopt our floodplains, we're going to have two sets of floodplains that we're going to have to manage and deal with. So we're going to keep the map that I showed you active. We're going to continue to update it. We've actually put on some other layers on there since we first rolled it out a year ago. But yes, I think everybody understands that this is good information. It's good engineering that went behind it. That would be ridiculous to hide behind it or not utilize it and wait for FEMA to adopt it, which could be 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just bought in Berry Creek,
Uh-huh.
long before FEMA charges me flood insurance.
Well, so that flood insurance would come from your mortgage lender, and they would have,
Mortgage, so.
okay, then you wouldn't be required to have flood insurance. If you've got your house paid for, you paid cash for it, nobody's going to make you have flood insurance. That would be your choice. You can look at our maps, assess your own risk, and you can talk to us if you have any questions. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Well, I was gonna ask a question, what's the implications for, of insurance for the homeowner?
Yes, well, so obviously FEMA changed the rules on flood insurance a few years ago called flood risk. Used to be anybody could go to any insurer and they would have to give you the same rates on flood insurance based on the elevation of your home, where it is in the floodplain, that type of thing. That's changed. Now insurers can go to multiple sources to get information, and they don't just use the floodplain. They'll use how close are you to the creek? How elevated are you? Do you have runoff coming from other different directions than the floodplain? And so they will go to any source they can. So even if we didn't have our study, which we think is very accurate and pretty good, and based on the feedback, we're getting some thumbs up on it, they could still go to those statewide studies that are already out there as well, or any other sources of information they have. So, and then insurers can charge different rates on your same structure depending on what they assess the risk is. So it's no longer you're going to get the same rate from an insurer. So it could pay to shop around. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question, but you answered it.
Okay, great. Yes, ma'am.
This is a complex question. We live along Possum Creek. When we built our house, started building it in around 2002, they'd done planning between 2000 and 2002. And we built 10 feet beyond the 100-year floodplain at that time. The Atlas 14 study puts us in the 100-year floodplain now.
Okay.
I don't think that necessarily accounts for elevation, though, does it?
The one maps I was showing you does not, no.
Okay.
Because we don't have the elevation on all the homes in the floodplain at this
But
time.
there has also been development, and we have noticed the increase in the way the floods came through with the first development, and now there are 2 or 3 more developments, none of which are shown, not even the first one that came on this map.
Okay.
Okay? So those are increasing play, because all of those do drain into Possum Creek. Everything east of 1105 drains down into Possum Creek. The other thing is that there are draws on each side of our property. once we cut those, if there's some way to get them cut out and to get those draws cleaned out so that that doesn't happen, that feeds yet more water more quickly down into Fossil Creek, which increases the flooding level there. And the same on the other side. So what are our options for controlling, managing, mitigating the flood that we thought we were planning for when we built?
You know, I have to tell people floodplain delineations and determinations are always dynamic. They're going to change based on the latest science, which does factor in the soil types and the impervious cover and all that, of course. The county has adopted higher stringent standards about 5 years ago on developments where they're all required to put in detention ponds now to hold back the runoff to pre-existing development conditions or to pre-development conditions. So theoretically, they are holding back the increase in runoff that occurred for a 2-year, 10-year, 25-year, and 100-year storms. So we look at all those storm events.
Ponds are supposed to hold.
Yes.
To manage 100 years.
Yes. And we do have that in our regulations, and we look at the detailed engineering that goes behind that. So we do have that in there to help mitigate the increase in runoff for the properties that come under our jurisdiction to regulate. And those regulations have been in place for a few years now. So that should help with the increase in runoff occurring that way. As far as the vegetation management, that's really up to the property owners. The county does not have the resource to go in there and manage, creek maintenance and vegetation and that type of thing. We certainly encourage you to work with your neighbors, depending on what the situation is. But yes, we understand if people aren't maintaining creeks and the vegetation gets out of hand, or you got winter storms and freezes off a bunch of trees or stuff that we've had over the last few years and stuff's falling in the creek, that is a problem. It's really up to the landowners to manage that as best they can. Certainly, we do allow vegetation removal to kind of help keep things clean and that type of thing. So it's just every scenario is kind of different depending on where you are. But yes, we are aware that creek management or the lack of will affect, floodplains for people that live nearby, upstream or downstream. We do the best we can. We do have regulations for working in the floodplain and that type of thing. We do have some exemptions for just strict vegetation maintenance. If you cut things down at ground level, that's generally exempt. If you're getting there with a dozer and you're in a floodplain, that would require some permitting to make sure that's done correctly. So it is a complicated thing. It's not going to be perfect scenarios, but yes, we do encourage you to talk to your neighbors if there's a concern one way or the other, and then we'll get involved, obviously, when we need to, or you report things to us.
Okay, municipal utility districts, hopefully most of y'all have heard of these, or commonly called MUDs. The takeaway here is that due to some changes in annexation laws, the majority of the development that we're currently seeing is happening outside of city limits. And commonly, in order to extend utilities or finance these projects, they're happening in MUDs. And with all of the growth and trying to address the growth, one of the things that the Commissioners Court has done is asked that newly created MUDs, so we had a handful, maybe 90 at that time, that already existed and were in place, and we're not, the court was not looking at going retroactively on those, but anything since the spring of 2023 on has said that MUDs are like a city. Okay, MUDs can levy taxes, and that the road maintenance and right-of-way for the county's long-range transportation plan need to be a part, the MUD being responsible for the road maintenance, so the county tax revenue is not paying for those items within these new districts. The MUD tax is doing that, and then also dedication of right-of-way for the county's long-range transportation plan needed to be part of these new MUD creations. This just kind of gives you an example. One of the reasons for that is when you look at the entire county budget in 2024, $552 million compared to one city, $544 million. The county just has limits on property tax revenue and even the sources of that revenue, where cities have a variety of different sources, and the county, doesn't collect sales tax like cities do, and has very limited other fees. So this is an affordability issue for the county to continue to add, as Matt was talking earlier, of the 1,600 miles of roadways, to continue to add these subdivision streets to the county's maintenance obligations in new MUD, spring of 2023 going forward. Those are the responsibility of the MUD. Okay, now I'm going to talk about our transportation plan. This is very, very important. I'm going to have to go through it quickly, but this one and the road bond program that'll be next are very, very important. So, okay, we all know what this is. Nobody likes this. We've all seen it. I think somebody mentioned earlier they had a meeting in Austin, or was in the vehicle for over an hour. So the county planning for long-range transportation plans, and maybe seeing what other entities had done in the past, said, you know what, let's think about our approach, and maybe let's think about doing something different. Because historically what has happened is a city, county, whoever has said, hey, we need a transportation plan. Let's go hire an engineering firm. Let's have them look at where the people live, where the businesses are, where people are going, where the jobs are. And let's look, 20 years out, and let's see what roadways might be necessary in that 20-year plan. Well, really, what that is doing is creating more of what would be typically called like a capital improvements project list or a CIP list. That's the stuff that needs to be built over that period of time to handle the traffic based on modeling. Well, what happens is that plan says, okay, that road, someone up in the Gerald area was talking to me about County Road 306, so I'll use that as an example. County Road 306, based on where people live, where the businesses and jobs are, only needs to be a 2-lane road, okay? And that plan is wonderful, it's beautiful, we put it on the shelf, and again, it's a 20-year plan. Well, you get to the end of the life of the plan, and somebody goes, hey, we need to update our transportation plan. Well, what they come back and say is, whoa, we've got all these subdivisions, we've got new businesses, we've got new things up in the Gerald area. I'm speaking countywide, but I'm just trying to relate it to a real world situation up in Gerald. That County Road 306, where we thought it needed to be a 2-lane road, needs to be a 4-lane road. Well, here is the problem that we've seen to the south of us, and then in other areas of the state with that kind of planning approach, is by that time, County Road 306 has everybody's favorite barbecue restaurant built right up next to the roadway. You've got the attorney's office, you've got schools, churches, homes, all kinds of things built up against the roadway. At that point in time, it is financially and politically nearly impossible, basically impossible, to widen that from a 2-lane to a 4-lane roadway. So what the county has done is say, okay, rather than look and constrain this by 20 years, let's look at full build out of the county. We don't know how the county will build out over time. We don't know if every area of the county will build out. But if we're planning for roadways and long-term, safety and mobility and prosperity for our county, if every square inch is developed, what would we need? And so this is actually maybe the more appropriate map. At least one commissioner, because this shocks a lot of people, at least one commissioner calls this the scary map. And this is what we came back with. And what you see, the blue lines that you see fewer of are controlled access roadways. So when we say controlled access, think of something like I-35 or 130, where the only way you get on and off the main lanes are via ramps. There's not like, you don't pull out of HEB directly on the I-35 main lanes. You pull onto a frontage road, and then there's a system of ramps. So those kinds of roadways, this is approximately where we would need those in the spacing around the county, at full build out. And then the orange or gold are arterial roadways. So it could be 4 to 6 lane roadways. If everywhere is developed out, where we would need to plan for those roadways to be in the future. And so the county has been instituting this plan as time has gone on. The blue controlled access roads, you can see here, it causes a lot of people, if you live in out in a rural area of the county and you look at the scary map earlier, and there's a blue line going right over your living room, that can be kind of frightening, okay? Well, look, there are going to be, we can't not plan. Not having a plan is just going to lead to failure, okay? People are going to keep coming here. Talked earlier about how there's not the ability to just say no to the development. We can regulate it and we can adopt rules that address it, but we can't just say no. People are going to continue to come here. So we have to plan for the long-term safety, mobility, and prosperity of our county. And so rather than have a bunch of kind of conceptual unknown lines you see on some of the early documents, you can see basically everything from the west side of the county to basically State Highway 95. There's a little bit that's taking place east of 95. There's less, not that there's none, but there's less development kind of on this side of the county. The Commissioner's Court has invested the resources to go study all of those and be able to say exactly where they are, so that, back to the person who the line is going through their living room, obviously when you're planning one of these, the first thing you do is don't want to go through somebody's living room, but is set the alignments for these roadways so people know, property owners know where they are, developers know where they are. Everybody, there's some certainty on, okay, we don't have the dollars to go build all these, but as properties are developed or people are making decisions on, maybe building a home, selling their land, those kinds of things, there's some, we've identified where they are located. Now, the orange or gold lines, those are really more, the county may from time to time get involved in the design or construction or planning of some of those, but those are really more a tool for development. So as tracts of land are developed by developers, they come in, the property falls on one of those lines. We're requiring them to set aside that right-of-way or preserve that right-of-way, well, really for the developers, the gold or the blue lines, but set aside and preserve that right-of-way to the extent that we're able by law. It's, we're not able, if somebody has a 5-acre tract and they're cutting it into 3 tracts or something, I mean, we can't, and half their property is one of these future roadways, we can't ask for all of that right-of-way. So there's a proportionality component in the law, but the gold and orange are a tool as properties are developed to have these future roadway corridors available. So that's a really quick breeze through that, but I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end. Okay, last division is our road bond program. I think Matt mentioned it at the very beginning that the Road and Bridge Division and the $73 million in that budget pays for maintenance. So that is the Road and Bridge Division and all that money, which is a big pot of money, pays for taking care of what we currently have. It does not pay for building new roadways, adding additional lanes, and adding capacity to the system and other important safety improvements. So historically, Williamson County has gone out with road bond packages. It's generally every 6-7 years, something like that. The last one was in 2023. The way that works is the Commissioner's Court recognizes, is there a need to consider a road bond package? If yes, then they appoint a group of citizens. It's called the Citizens Bond Committee. They will go out and talk to our cities, our MUDs, our ISDs, everybody around the county and say, okay, what is the list of needed projects? And they'll come back. It's usually, billions of dollars, and the county not having the ability to or desire to go borrow billions of dollars. We'll narrow it down to a reasonable package, and then that goes on the ballot, and then it's decided on by voters. Historically in Williamson County, the voters have approved these road bond packages. And you can see here the various years of those road bond packages and the dollar amounts and then the number of projects. Unfortunately, just like all of us, if we're at the grocery store, our money doesn't go as far as it used to. So you can see as time goes on, although the amounts of the packages, projects and construction and right-of-way is very, very, very expensive. But the important takeaway here is that additional roadway capacity to be able to, and important safety projects, so, often traffic signals are taking an intersection where there are 4 legs just all at grade or all on the surface of the ground, and splitting it where one maybe goes over the top so that you don't have, terrible T-bone accidents that could injure or kill people. Lots of other various safety improvements. All of those are only funded through these road bond packages. The road and bridge maintenance tax does not pay for those. So right now, and some of these projects a lot of these are still active and ongoing. Certainly a lot of the 2023 are active and ongoing. Here's a picture of a few of the projects. This is the Liberty Hill Bypass, which is south of Liberty Hill. As you travel, maybe from Barnett County, this is a new roadway that goes south of town, bypasses, and gets you back onto 29 east of Liberty Hill. This segment you're looking here is from 1869 to 279 or Baghdad Road. That was part of the 2019 package. The 2023 builds the other 2 ends that connect it to 29. This is Westinghouse Road, which is just to the south of us here, from 1460 all the way to 130. New Hope Drive. This is looking towards Ronald Reagan, so this is east of Ronald Reagan. This is a road that runs east-west, a major arterial, and a partnership with Cedar Park. Corridor H, Sandbass Road. This is an ongoing construction project that the southern lanes are now basically complete, and traffic has shifted over there, and now working on the northernmost lanes, but this is an ongoing construction project. Kenny Fort Boulevard. This is a partnership with the city of Round Rock. This road is now complete and open. This is a piece of East Wilco Highway at US 79. This is a major project on the east side of the county. You can see some very significant bridges that go over the UP Railroad and US 79 there. And this is Corridor C. This is also just to the south of us here. So Sam Houston used to dead end, and now that's been extended, goes over 130. There's a new bridge that goes over 130, goes kind of south of Georgetown, Eastview High School, and ties back into 29 east of town. And then lastly, we're finally here. The 89th slide. This is a map of all of the 2023 road bond projects. I think Connie's going to share these slides, but many of these things are, like, especially the road bond projects, the long-range transportation plan, are all, the information is all available on our website. There's individual pages for David's Atlas 14 floodplain study. We covered a lot of ground. I'm happy to take questions now from the group, or I will hang around if people want to come individually.